Well,
4 minutes after.
pretty good, you know.
Not necessarily. Yes. Just forgot our jokes, so it's not going to be a very good comedy show. Well, good evening, everybody. We're trying to decide if we should start when the event starts or start now. So we're going to start now because I got the microphone from George after arm wrestling with him for a while. Anyway, welcome to BIMI. I'm glad that each and every one of you are here. We always enjoy Carl joining us. This will be his 3rd summer with us, and we're very excited about that. BIMI stands for the Block Island Maritime Institute. Probably 90% of you know that, but just in case, for the 10%, we want to be welcoming and hospitable. So BIMI has a purpose, and our purpose is to provide educational programs and maritime activities, including marine science and maritime history for residents and visitors on Block Island. 2 weeks ago, when I took a poll, every one of you were either residents or visitors on Block Island, so I'm assuming that may hold true tonight too. At any rate, we're very glad you're here. BIMI has undergone quite a bit of transformation in the last few years. We've completely redone this building. You can't see it because it's all structural. And we've opened up a tremendous viewing area with 5 tanks. So if you haven't been there yet, please, after the presentation this evening, go out and check out our aquatic tanks. They're really quite fascinating. We do 3 basic functions. One is adult programming for adults, which is what we're doing this evening. We also have a daily program for children of all ages with a lot of activities centered around our educational room, right? You have to go to the restroom, then keep going further and you'll find our educational area. And then thirdly, we do something else. What do we do? Oh yes, we provide programs for young people who are whose home environment is not near the coast, mostly in urban areas. They can come out and spend better part of a week out here learning about creation. So that's who we are. And now the good news is that I'm going to introduce somebody who's going to introduce Carl. So who am I going to introduce?
Well, it's not entirely correct. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items and then introduce John, who will introduce Carl. But, you know, we do this on a fly, you know, we're trying. So the housekeeping items are this. Number 1, please turn off your phones if you haven't done that. It's hard to remember. I had to double check my phone myself. Also, it's a good idea to register for these talks going forward. It turns out that we do have a room capacity limit, and it just ensures that you'll have a space. Normally, I wouldn't consider a problem, but with someone of Dr. Safina's stature, you can see that we fill up the place. Afterwards, there will be a book signing at the back table there. We've got plenty of the last 2 books that Carl wrote that he'll talk about tonight. And please also consider donating if you like the program tonight, as it really takes your help for us to continue to attract speakers of Dr. Safina's quality. And now I get to turn it over to John, who can do a proper introduction of our speaker tonight.
I'm not sure that that's true, but I'll do my best. I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to be part of the Block Island Maritime Institute, and I welcome you here. Many people have read some of Dr. Carl Safina's books. It's my pleasure to welcome him. I met Dr. Safina in 1999, and what do they say? Full disclosure, it wasn't in person, but it was with his first book, Song for the Blue Ocean, which is an amazing book. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you. There are several books that follow equally as exciting and important. So the Song for the Blue Ocean is a story about what is going on to our fish stock in the Atlantic and the Pacific. It's really interesting, and it's in 1999. Those things are worse now than they were there, I think is a correct assessment. Dr. Safina is starred in the PBS series Saving the Ocean. He's written many books. The most recent are Becoming Wild and A View from Lazy Point. He's been called, and I probably would think this is low. I think he's been called the new Rachel Carlson and Jacques Cousteau, but I think he's better than that. I never really liked those other books. He's a great author. He's an accomplished scientist. We've had scientists here and we've had fishermen here, but Dr. Safina is a fishing scientist who really enjoys fishing. Make Dr. Safina comfortable here and enjoy his talk. And thanks for coming.
Hello, everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be here again. How many people have seen my previous talks here? Okay, a good amount, and a good amount have not. How many people have not? Oh, that's good. Okay, good, because I'm going to do the same talk you've seen before. But actually, that's only half not true, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a combination. It's a combo platter tonight of my last two books, and the first of the last two is Beyond Words. That's about what animals think and feel. It's about cognition and emotion in non-humans. And then the new book, Becoming Wild. Oh, all right. My wife is interrupting me to tell me I'm screwing up here. So, okay. So is this microphone working? The wireless one working?
It should be, yes.
Okay. I'm all tangled up and everything. All right, thank you. So is the microphone working? Can you hear me? It doesn't sound like it's working. No, it's on. I know it's switched on.
Oh. Well, okay, so what's your great ideas?
All right. Well, I would have to yell. Maybe if I put it right in my mouth. Possibly if I wear the mic like a nose ring, that will work. Is that working now? Not really, right? It is. How about outside?
Yes.
Yes, they're saying yes. Okay. All right. Drop my click. I'm getting off to a great start here this evening, as you can tell. Maybe I should just end here and ask for questions. Anyway, okay, so can I proceed, sweetie? Okay, she gave me the thumbs up. All right, so it's going to be a combination of the last book. So Becoming Wild, my most recent book, is about culture, mostly in non-humans, but whenever you study non-human animals, you learn a lot about human animals as well. And let's launch right into it. So we're going to start out by asking a question that may seem familiar to many of you. And the question that we're going to answer tonight is, does my dog really love me, or does she just want a treat? How many of you have asked that question? At least sometimes, right? Some people ask that question quite a lot. Well, I think it's easy to see that our dog really loves us. And you can tell exactly what's going on in those fuzzy little heads by just looking at them. It's very obvious what they're thinking, right? Or maybe it's not obvious what they're thinking. Maybe you really can't tell at all what they're thinking just by looking at them. But they are thinking something. You can't possibly look at a dog and really believe that they're not thinking anything and nothing is going on in that little head, right? The problem is that if you ask the question, do you love me? That is a question about me and my own needs and insecurities. It's not a question about you. It doesn't really help me to understand you if my question is, do you love me? So I needed a different question if I was going to try to understand something about the minds of animals. And that question was, who are you? That's a question that opens a door and can help us start to maybe get in a little bit. So who are you? We all have capacities of the human mind. We know we have these capacities, and we know that humans have them. Most humans have most of these capacities. But the question is, yes, right, not everybody, but the question is, do only humans have these capacities? And indeed, do only humans have minds? What's going on in the other brains that share the planet with us? Is it possible, as scientists said for a long time, many scientists said for a long time, that nothing is going on in those heads? And they also said that it's not a scientific question because there's no way you can get into the mind of a non-human creature. But that is not true. There are several good ways in. You can look at brains, you can consider evolution, the organizing principle of all of life on Earth, and you can just watch what they do. And that's what we're going to do. So these are nerve cells. Nerve cells are something animals have. Plants don't have nerve cells. Animals have them, and they first appeared in jellyfish, but they're basically the same thing, whether they are in a jellyfish or a dog or a striped bass or a crayfish. So here's a crayfish, and people have done experiments with crayfish where they have them in a tank, and every time the crayfish comes out of cover and tries to explore, they give them an unpleasant little electrical shock. And after a while, pretty short while, they stop coming out and they develop what you would call in a human being something that looks like anxiety disorder, but you can't tell anything about their experience just by the fact that they're not coming out anymore, even though their nerve cells are basically the same kind of nerve cells that we have. However, if you put into the water a drug that treats anxiety disorder in humans, they relax again and they start coming out again, which strongly suggests that they felt something like anxiety, that they had an experience that was at least analogous, and that the same drug made them feel differently about their experience as it would in people. So that's pretty interesting. So how do we consider the fact that crayfish can experience anxiety? Well, mostly we boil them by the millions. Octopuses are mollusks. They're not even vertebrates. They're not on the same evolutionary path as all the animals we got our central nervous system from. They have a distributed nervous system. They have basically 8 brains. The last common ancestor we had with them was something like a worm 700 million years ago, and their intelligence developed totally separately from ours. They're the closest thing on Earth to meeting an alien from another world, but they're here in our world, and they can use tools as well as most apes, and they can recognize different people, and they seem to develop likes and dislikes of different people who keep them. This is remarked upon frequently by people who take care of octopuses in aquariums. So how do we consider the ape-like intelligence of octopuses? Mostly we boil them by the millions also. On coral reefs, there are fish called groupers. Probably everybody here knows that, but probably not everybody here knows that some groupers, if they chase a fish into a crevice in the rock or the coral, they will go to where they know that a moray eel is sleeping, and they have a way of telling the moray, follow me. The moray understands that, they are communicating, and the moray will follow, and then the grouper will say, it's right here, and the moray will go into the crevice. Sometimes the fish bolts and the grouper will get it. and sometimes the moray will get it. So this is a partnership that has probably been working for probably millions of years. And nobody knew that they did this until about 16 years ago. And now we know. But when I say now we know, I mean like the 14 people who read that paper now know. But how do we honor this probably ancient interspecies partnership? We don't boil them. No, we fry them. This says a lot more about us and our mental capacity for caring about the rest of the world than it says about their mental capacity for being in the world. So we're not starting at a high level of cognition ourselves. But if you look at the evolution of brains, you can see there on the left, there's a basic mammalian brain, and the mouse on the left has a really basic model, and the human has a more elaborated model. And that's the way evolution works. Evolution doesn't start with something brand new all of a sudden. It takes what's in stock and on the shelf, and it fabricates a new twist, and that's how evolution progresses. And if you look at a human brain and a chimpanzee brain, you see they're both basically the same, except that ours is substantially larger. It's a good thing ours is substantially larger because we are the most insecure of all of the apes. But that's a dolphin. So what does that tell us? It's a bigger brain and it's more elaborated. So what does that tell us? Does it tell us that dolphins are more intelligent than people? Maybe, not necessarily, because it could also be that they need a lot of processing for their sonar. We don't use sonar, although interestingly, blind people can develop the ability to navigate with sonar. So it's actually possible to train a human brain to navigate that way. But nonetheless, they do it naturally. They do it, they learn how to do that as we learn how to speak a language. It's possible that a lot of that brain is given to the very, very fine processing of reflected sound. We just don't know, because this is true. But there's a but at the end of that sentence. We can see the workings of the mind in the logic of behaviors. So here we can make sense of this picture exactly as the elephants make sense of it. It's not that we look at this and we say, oh my God, I have no idea what in the world is going on. What's going on is very clear. They found a patch of shade under some palm trees and they're letting their babies go to sleep there. That's their plan, and that's what they're doing. And the adults are resting, but they're not going to sleep. They're not lying down. They're facing outward and they're touching, because the world is a dangerous place. Now, that's very clear, and you understand all of that. And the reason you understand all of that is because our minds are very similar and they work very similarly. It's totally comprehensible to us what they are thinking and what plan they are executing, because under the same sun on the same savannas, listening to the roars and the sounds of the same potential predators, we became who we are, and they became who they are. And we've been neighbors for a very, very long time. Whoops. So as mammals, the imperative is basically the same in the big picture, which is stay alive, dodge the dangers, find enough food to continue living, keep your babies alive and raise the next generation, and then we fade off the stage. And that's, in broad strokes, that's life for them and for us. They look different on the outside. Their outer contours are the same, but as mammals, their outer contours are different, but as mammals, we are the same. Under the skin, we are all kin. Those elephants, they're outfitted for hiking. Whales are outfitted for diving, but we have the same organs, we have the same skeleton, we have the same nervous system, and we have the same neurotransmitters and hormones that create mood and motivation in our conscious mind. We all have the same. We think that we are very separated by evolution from whales. We know we're mammals. We know we had a common ancestor once upon a time. We think we're very separated. In human terms of time, that was, yes, a long time ago, maybe 50 million years ago. That sounds long. But we were already so similar that in their front flippers, they have exactly the same 5 finger bones as we have in our hands. It's just that they're covered over with skin now and they've become flippers. They've just changed shape a little bit to be adapted to what they do. But under the skin, as I say, we are all kin. So we see things that we can recognize, like helping babies when they need help, like the curiosity that the young show to a world that they're just learning. In many social animals, we see deep emotional bonds of affection. And we see deep pair bonds among mates. And dancing and courtship is basically the same thing. The albatrosses are courting, and so are those 2 women. And then we still ask a really strange question. We look at animals that have eyes and noses and tongues and have fun with each other, and we say, are they even conscious? Well, I think that's a very weird kind of a question, because what is consciousness? Consciousness is the sensations that you experience through your senses. If you've gotten total anesthesia, it makes you unconscious. That means you become not aware of the input from your senses. You don't see anything, you don't hear anything, you don't taste anything, you don't feel anything. And then when it wears off or you come out of it, you regain consciousness. Well, obviously, they're conscious. Some people talk about what makes us human, and different people have different pet things about the thing that makes us human. One of the things that we hear a lot is empathy makes us human. But there's a lot of other empathy in the world. Basically, if you live in a group, you have to have empathy, because empathy is just the ability of your mind to match the mood of your companions. So that if you come into a room or somebody comes into your room and they're happy, it lifts you, it makes you feel happy. If they look upset, you get startled and upset. That's empathy. And all social animals have to have that kind of basic empathy, because when it's time to hurry, you have to hurry. You can't stand around and talk about it and decide whether you're going to hurry with everyone. If everybody startles and leaves, and you stand there on the beach saying, I'm not leaving until I understand why everybody left, well, you're not going to last very long, because the falcon is going to see that you're just standing there. That's why they have basic empathy. And the oldest form of empathy is contagious fear. And humans have a lot of contagious fear. Humans who have any money in the stock market all have contagious fear. Everything in the living world is on a sliding scale. There really are no breaks in categories. We call them different things so we can talk about them. But on the sliding scale of empathy, the basic kind of empathy I've been talking about, and what I call sympathy is when you don't feel it, but you understand it. I'm sorry to hear that your grandmother passed away. I never met her. I'm not feeling aggrieved, but I understand it. That's sympathy. And if you are moved to do something active to help, I call that form of sympathy compassion, okay? But everything is on a sliding scale, and a lot of other animals have empathy. In fact, human empathy has a very, very long way to go. We are very imperfect with our empathy. For one thing, we round up empathic animals and we kill them and we eat them. And if you think that this is a cheap shot or it's not fair or humans are predators or whatever you think about not agreeing with that point. I will grant you that. Maybe it's a cheap shot, but we are not so good to human beings either. Human empathy is a work in progress, and it has a long, long way to go. People who know only one thing about animal behavior know a complicated sounding word called anthropomorphism. Has anybody heard of that word, anthropomorphism? Yes, a lot of people have. And you know that it means that you're not allowed to attribute any human thought or human emotion to a non-human, right? Well, that's totally not scientific. Science is not supposed to have rules about what you're allowed to think. Science is supposed to believe what the data and information lead you to. And what it leads you to is that we're not the only ones that feel and that have thoughts. So I was explaining this to somebody one time, and she said, okay, wait. But how do you really know that any other kind of animal has a thought or a feeling? And I realized that the answer to that question was right there on the rug, because when our pup comes over to us and rolls over on her back, first of all, she comes to us. She doesn't go to the chair or the dining room table and roll over on her back. She comes to us because she's just had a thought. And the thought is, I would like my belly rubbed. And I know that Carl and Patricia are my family. And I also know that if I roll over on my back, they understand what I'm asking for. And I know from experience that they know how to do it and make it feel good. So she's had a thought and she has felt, and it's not really more complicated than that. But if you think that's not scientific enough and you like technology, well, you can put a dog in an MRI. People have done that. And then they show them pictures of strange people and people they know, and they watch their brain light up, and their brain lights up in similar patterns to what happens when you do the same experiment with humans. Many of you who have dogs probably thought when your dog is sleeping and their little paws are twitching and maybe they're going woof, 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 like that, and you say, oh, I think she's dreaming. Anybody say that? They think your dog is dreaming? Well, the answer to that is yes, they are dreaming. A lot of mammals dream. That's a rat sleeping there. And those are the activity patterns through sections of the rat's brain that are being scanned. And they show dream patterns that are very similar to the dream patterns in humans. This doesn't surprise me at all. But recently I read a paper that said that cuttlefish dream. And I have to say, even I was surprised by that. Now, we're going to transition based on some things we've been talking about what animals can think and experience and feel. We're going to talk about another aspect that some animals have, which is culture. Mostly we know that there is culture, and we know that all humans are very cultural, and almost never do we actually ask, what is culture and why does culture exist? If you look at other animals and their culture, you have to ask that question. But if you just look at humans, we're so cultural, we take it totally for granted and we never think about it. What we think is culture are products of culture. We say, well, technology is culture, religion is culture, sports are culture, arts are culture. That's actually not culture. Those are the products of culture. All humans, I'll tell you what culture is in a minute. All humans have culture, and the one thing about culture in all humans are it differs a lot, but humans are basically human beings. Their basic humanity and their basic dignity comes shining through regardless of the culture. So what is culture? Culture is learned behaviors that flow socially, that tell you what we do, how we do it, what we like, what we find attractive. You know, we find certain music attractive, certain clothing attractive, certain cuisine we find very appealing, and clothes and music from other cultures often strikes us as just funny or weird, right? So we've learned what we like and what we do and how we do it from others in our culture. Culture has functions, that's why it exists, and that's why not all humans have the same culture. It tells us who we are, it gives us an identity, and mainly it answers the question, how do we live here? If we all understand how we live here in the same way, we can all get along. We understand transactions and interactions. If I work for you and I expect to get paid, and you expect that sometime later you're going to return a favor, we're going to have a problem right away. If I go into your house of worship and I don't have any idea what you do there, I know what I do where I learned how to do it, we're going to be confused. If I go to shake your hand and you bow, we're going to be confused about what's going on. So culture lets us interact together. It answers the question, how do we live here? And when it changes, we have a hard time understanding who we are and what to do. And things are changing pretty rapidly for people, especially around the world. So there I am with two Maasai women, the one in the middle, obviously still very traditional. And the woman here on the right side of the picture, a very westernized person, grew up in a totally traditional Maasai village in a dung hut, but became very westernized and was working as a research assistant on a science project. There she is against that door, the same woman with the black hat there. But what's happening here is another Maasai woman is telling two very traditional men that if they bring their goats into the national park again, she can get them in a lot of trouble. And you can kind of see from the looks on their faces that this role reversal is very bewildering to them, because where they grew up, women have no status. They don't ever tell men what to do. And now this woman is behind a desk in an official government uniform telling them what they better not do. That's a bewildering situation for them. Where do we get our culture from? Where do you think we first learn our culture? We first learn it from our mother, and then from our social group. But mostly at first, we just get it from our mother, and we get it from just watching how our mother does things and following her around. Now, the basic importance of culture is a matter of life and death. It tells us, how do we live here? So if you're born in the Amazon, you grow up just easily learning how to live in the Amazon. You learn what food is, you learn what's dangerous, maybe you learn how to hunt with a blowpipe, and you can do that. It's not even an issue. If you grow up in the Arctic, you learn how to catch salmon and smoke them for the winter. You learn how to harpoon seals. That's just what you do. But if you take Arctic people and put them in the Amazon, they die. And if you take Amazonian people and put them in the Arctic, they freeze. That's the importance of culture. It's a matter of life and death, because it answers the question, how do we live here? Culture is not just a human thing. It's very obvious in humans, and because we're humans and we have our culture, we know it implicitly, but there are many other animals that have culture that they rely on, and they too learn it from their mothers. What do you have to learn if you're a baby chimpanzee? What does it take you about 10 years to learn before you can become independent as a chimpanzee? And the answer is everything. You have to learn everything if you're a chimpanzee. If you had a baby infant chimpanzee raised with people in a house and then released it somewhere in the best chimpanzee habitat that remains in Africa, it would just die. It would have absolutely no idea. It would have no social context. It wouldn't know what to eat. It wouldn't know what to do. It would be nobody, and it would not be able to last. So they have to learn everything. What is food? Where is food? When does it ripen? How do you tell if it's ripening? When you continue to make your circuit around your territory, testing and checking all the food trees. What is dangerous? Where is the water? What do you eat when the fruit goes away? And how do you act among elders and higher ranking individuals? All of that etiquette and all of those survival skills have to be completely learned. And that is true in a surprising array of animals. Sperm whales, which unlike chimpanzees, they live in this region, although they're pretty rare here, but they do come here occasionally. Sperm whales are very cultural whales. They have a social organization that is really similar to the way African elephants are organized socially. They live in female-led family groups. If you're female, you stay in the group of your birth your whole life. If you're a male, you leave at adolescence, you start to hang out with older males, and then eventually you probably live a totally independent existence. African elephants do very, very similar thing. But there's another thing about sperm whales that is even more unusual, and that is that in their social groups, they use patterns of clicks that are a little like a very simple Morse code. And with those clicks, they can announce who they are as individuals, which family they belong to. I'm gonna take that off while I'm talking because people are straining to read it, and then I'll flip back to it. Who I am as an individual, which family I belong to, and which clan our family is a member of. If you hear a stranger, but they're telling you they're a member of the same clan, you can go and socialize with them if you're a sperm whale. If it's a different clan, you turn around and you leave, because a clan does things the same way. They travel the same way, they travel the same distance from the coast at the same speeds, in the same patterns, they hunt similarly. Different clans do things differently. They don't know how to cooperate. So this just sums up group identity, not just for humans. All the things I just said are here on this slide. You probably have a hard time reading it in the back, but I just said it. So when we see animals, we just tend to label them, and then we think we're done. We say, well, that's a chimpanzee, those are orcas, and those are elephants. What else do we need to know? I'm done. I know what I'm seeing. Well, that's not how they see each other at all. That chimpanzee there on the left there, we'll see her a little later again, but her name is Lottie. She lives in Uganda. She is a member of a well-studied wild group of chimpanzees, and she's a very high-ranking female in that group. That tall-finned killer whale was 36 years old when I took that photo of him. They're all members of the L pod. Next to him is his cousin, who's 42. They swim about 75 miles a day, and they've known each other for decades because they're in the same little family pod. They're a member of a larger community. They all know who's who. If after swimming in the ocean for decades, you're right next to somebody you've known for a really long time, that is not an accident. That is something that you've done very, very intentionally, because who you are depends on who you're with. You know who you are by who you're with. And that's basically the same way we understand ourselves within our social context. What is your identity? It's who you are in relation to others around you in your network of relations. So what do you think you see here? You think you see 3 chimpanzees. That's only the very beginning of it. What you really see is 3 individual chimpanzees with individual histories who live in a cultural group. Hawa is the most dominant male in that group. Musa was a contender for most dominant but Hawa won in a surprise upset because everybody thought that Musa, because he's bigger, he looks more commanding, and he was a little older. They just assumed that he would win, but he didn't. Why are they right next to each other? They keep a very close eye on each other because they are what we would call frenemies. They understand that they have a certain friction that will never quite go away, and they keep close tabs on each other. Simon in the back is a young up-and-coming male. He may very well one day fight Hawa for the top spot. He may win, he may lose, but Hawa can't afford to keep Simon out of sight for very long. That's why they're together. Look at the faces here. At first blush, you say, oh, chimpanzees, but look at their faces. They're very, very individual. They all have histories. These guys and Lottie are in an adjacent community from the other three I just showed you. Talisker used to be the most dominant male, but usually when dominant males lose their dominant top spot, they plummet in status and they don't live too many more years. He found a different strategy. He just stayed outside of the dominance hierarchy. He has high status. He doesn't contend for it with Ben. He and Ben are sort of frenemies. He never shows Ben full deference as the top ranker, but he also never challenges Ben. So they have a very fine strategic balance that they very intentionally maintain. Lottie, I talked about a little bit earlier. She's a high-ranking female, and she likes to hang around with the most dominant males. A lot of females don't like to hang around with males. Some of them like to be away from the social action and all the drama. She digs it. That's just a matter of personality. They all have individual personalities. And Masariki here, you see, he's young, but he's got a white face, a light-colored face, a pink face. All chimpanzees are born with light faces like that. And then as they get older, almost all of them turn black, but not all of them. And Masariki's face will always be light like that. So chimpanzees have worked out an answer to a question that we have yet to figure out and resolve. And that is that what color your face is makes no difference. There's a concept in biology called biodiversity. This is the diversity of life on Earth. And we are all taught that it exists in three levels. The genetic diversity within a species, how all the individuals look a little different because of genetic diversity. The diversity of species, species A, B, C, D, E, they're all genetically different. And then all of the genetic diversity that exists within different habitats. Much different genes are on coral reefs than there are in tropical rainforests, or at least a lot of different genes, and a lot of the same genes are in those places. So that's the way that biodiversity is usually thought about and usually taught. But it overlooks a really big fourth level of biodiversity, and that is culture. Culture is a level of diversity that is crucial for survival. And if the whole population of a species in a region dies out, the answer to the question, how do we live here, dies. You can't always get it back by just putting individuals from somewhere else out there and reintroducing them. That is difficult, and it doesn't always work well, and sometimes it's actually a flat-out disaster. For instance, this is a thick-billed parrot. They used to live in the southwest US and farther south in Central America. They were wiped out of the southwest US, and conservationists wanted to reintroduce them. So they bred a bunch of them in captivity. They brought them to the habitat. They opened the cages and let them out, and every single one of them died. They just had no idea where they were or what to do. Eating food in a cage is very different from knowing what is food, where do we go when the weather changes, what is dangerous here, what is a predator here. They just didn't know, and they all died. Similar things have happened with people trying to put bighorn sheep, for instance, back where they were all shot out. Put them in a beautiful, nice place in the summertime where there's loads and loads of food, up at 7,000 feet in the Rockies. And in autumn, they just have no idea where they're supposed to go. There's nobody to lead them. The culture of where we go in the winter, down to what lowlands, by what routes, is dead. So it takes a bunch of generations with extremely high mortality for the individuals to blunder into relearning how to stay alive. That's the importance of culture as a type of biological diversity. This is a bird called the regent honeyeater. It was very, very common in Australia. And now, because of habitat loss and other problems, it's declining precipitously. But it has a much bigger cultural problem on top of that. And that is they learn how to sing the males learn how to sing by hearing other males singing. That's how they learn the right song for their species. Females figure out who they will mate with by listening for the right song. If young males don't learn the right song because they've never heard a male because there are too few of them, when females meet those males, if they do, they won't mate with them because they don't sound right. So even though they're declining rapidly, the few that are left, when they meet, are not breeding well because a lot of females won't mate with males who don't sing right. So the cultural aspect is accelerating their plummet toward extinction. So what I highlighted there, I'll just read you the first line of what I highlighted. Song production in the remaining wild males varied dramatically, with 27% of them singing songs that differed from the regional cultural norm. And then the last thing, it says a severe decline in population density is associated with the loss of vocal culture. That's the importance of culture in this species, helping to accelerate it toward extinction. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit more about what this all means. I mentioned about the sperm whales. If they hear members of the same clan, they can socialize, otherwise they will not socialize. The same is very true with orcas. There are, on the West Coast, some of you may know, there are what's called different types of orcas. Some of them eat only fish. They hunt salmon, especially. They do not hunt mammals. They won't hunt seals, dolphins, or whales. They only eat fish. Others, the exact opposite. They only hunt mammals. These two types never mingle. If they hear each other and they come within 200 yards of each other, they turn around and they go the other way. If they mingled and tried to travel together, it wouldn't work, because to hunt fish, you need to be in a big noisy group to scare the fish into a big tight school to make them easy to catch. But if you hunt seals or dolphins, you have to be in a very small group that's silent. Maybe just 2 or 3 individuals, radio silence, because those mammals will hear you. With the fish, you want them to hear you and get scared into a tight ball. So they don't mingle because it doesn't work. They have different answers to the question of how do we live here. And it's so different, and it's been so different for so long, that these types have not actually interbred for 300,000 years, which by the normal definition of species, that makes them different species because they do not freely interbreed in the wild. So culture is driving them to become separate species. So culture can bring individuals together into groups. It makes groups either mingle or repel. And when they repel, it drives them deeper into a specialization, like eating only fish or eating only mammals. And those specializations can keep them apart until they begin evolving toward separate species. This is something I call cultural selection. You may know that Darwin talked about natural selection. That was one mechanism by which populations diverge into different species. You may not know that Darwin realized that natural selection did not account for all the diversity he saw. So he wrote another book with another mechanism called sexual selection, how choosing mates can drive populations into different species and drive a lot of the different ways that species look, with all of the ornamented plumage and fancy colors that birds have, or the ornamentation some mammals have. But there is, I believe, a third major thing going on among animals that drives them to be separate species, and that's what I've been talking about, which is cultural selection. So in two different countries, in the US and Canada, two different scientific groups had a very similar experience that involved orcas that they were following, that they said were being a little evasive. They were trying to track them. These were in the early days when they didn't really have electronic tracking devices, and boats didn't have GPS or even LORAN. It was in the 70s, I believe, in both cases. And what happened to each of them in separate instances, one in the US, one in Canada, is that they were following whales that were being a bit evasive. They didn't seem to want to be followed. And then they went into a fog bank, couldn't see anything, and they said, all right, well, that's it. Let's try to figure out where home is. So put away the cameras, stowed all the gear, looked at the compass, and started in the direction they thought home would be. A few minutes later, the whales reappeared in front of the boat. And they said, well, we're here to follow whales. Let's follow the whales. In the case in the US, anyway, they went 15 miles. And when the fog parted, the researcher's house was right there on the shoreline, and the whales turned around and left. He says, that seems like a woo-woo thing, but I just had the feeling that they were leading us home. And similarly, in Canada, they led her up through a passage where she had never seen them go, but that's where her house was. Inexplicable. Wild killer whales have never hurt a human being. This one, I saw him eating part of a gray whale that he and two of his companions had killed. But the researchers in that boat know that they have nothing to be afraid of, because wild killer whales don't hurt people. I watched him tear a seal into 3 pieces with 2 of his friends. And obviously that's a pretty big guy. But when that little boat came around the corner and they saw him, they just stopped to take pictures, because even though each of those people weighs about as much as a seal, they knew that they had nothing to be afraid of. They eat seals. Why don't they eat us? Why can we trust them around our toddlers? Why don't they hold a grudge for all the things we've done to them? Whoops. In the Bahamas, there's a woman named Denise Herzing, and she studies spotted dolphins, and she can recognize all the individual dolphins by their pattern of spots. It's, to me, totally bewildering. You can see here that they're quite different looking, but she knows dozens of them by sight. That to me is amazing. A lot of researchers are actually like that, about knowing animals by the dozen, by sight, when they've been doing it for 40 years. At any rate, when she goes out in the boat, she usually goes for a week at a time from Florida to the Bahamas. And she says it's like a happy reunion of friends. The dolphins recognize the boat, they recognize her. They come and they bow ride, and it's all very nice. And then they get in the water and they do their research of seeing who's who and watching what they do as the young ones learn and develop and the social groups change over time. So one day she went and they saw the dolphins, but the dolphins would not come near the boat. And she said to the captain, "What is wrong with the dolphins today? They're just acting bizarre." So then somebody came up from below and announced that someone on board had died during a nap in their bunk. Now, how would the dolphins know that one of the human hearts had stopped? Why would they care? And why would it seem to spook them? I don't know. But they went back, obviously, to take care of what they had to take care of. And when they came back a few days later, the dolphins acted totally normally. So what do these weird stories tell us? What can we conclude from them? I don't think we can conclude that much, but I think they do tell us something important. I think they tell us that there's a lot going on in the minds and the mental capacities and the emotional capacities of other brains that share this planet that we don't know about and that we never consider, but they are there. They're on the planet with us, and they are going on. In South Africa, there was a little dolphin in an aquarium who was named Dolly, and she was a tiny nursing age infant. And one day, one of the keepers was on a break, and he just was smoking a cigarette outside the dolphin tank, just watching Dolly and the other dolphins in there. And Dolly came right to the glass and just looked at him while he was smoking. And then she went back to her mother. And she nursed for a couple of minutes. And then she came back to the window and she opened her mouth and released all the milk, and it enveloped her head like a cloud of smoke. Now, when a human uses some substance to represent something else, we call that art. The things that make us human are not the things we tell ourselves make us human. Almost everything that we see in humans, you can see some of in some non-human somewhere, because we are in the process of evolution from the rest of life. And every other part of life is doing the same thing. Love is not the thing that makes us human. There's quite a lot of it, actually. I really love seabirds, and albatrosses are the epic seabirds of the world. They're also incredible parents. They go on trips that are 6,000 to 8,000 miles, taking maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get one meal for a chick that is waiting on their island, one gigantic meal. And they come back to that waiting chick. They nest in the most remote places in the world. Those albatrosses are on Laysan Island, which is as far from either continent as you can get on Earth. It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on islands so tiny, it doesn't even show up on this map. It's only about 3 miles across, and we never think of it, and that's what it looks like. They know we're here. We don't know they're here. So after 2 or 3 weeks of flying 6,000 or 8,000 miles all over the North Pacific to find a patch of food and bring home one meal, they bring home a lot of plastic nowadays, because to them, plastic smells like food. All of them have plastic in them. It doesn't always kill them. It's never good for them. This one was near to flying age. It was about 5 months old, and it died, and it was packed with red cigarette lighters. And this is not the relationship we are supposed to have with the rest of life on Earth. But it is the relationship we do have, because we named ourselves after our brains and how smart we are, Homo sapiens, the wise ones. Well, we're so wise we never think about the consequences of what we're doing. And yet, when we are expecting new human life, what do we paint on the nursery room walls? We paint animals. We don't paint computers or cell phones or work cubicles. We paint animals. We don't even know why we do this, but I've thought of this a lot and I have an idea about why we do it. I think we have an unconscious blessing for our soon to be born child, and that is, welcome to this beautiful world. We're not alone here. We have company. And yet, every one of those animals in any painting you'll see of Noah's Ark, deemed worthy of salvation by the Creator, every one of them is in danger now, and their flood is us. I talked a little bit about evolution earlier, and this is the evolutionary story that we are creating. This is not really the resume that I would like to have. For a few thousand years, Western civilization has told ourselves a story that we are the pinnacle of creation, that we are the only thing on earth that matters, and that everything else is here for us to use without worrying about the consequences. That story is false. A more realistic story is this. We're here with a lot of other things that have made the whole journey to be here at the same time that we are. If you try to wrap your mind around all of the real history of life on Earth, it is completely mind-boggling. You cannot really conceive of the time, you cannot really conceive of the scale or the diversity or the relationships. But there is, there are things in the cosmos that are everywhere in the universe. And these things make up what we call laws of physics. So there's light everywhere, there's gravitational attraction everywhere. These things are constant and they're ubiquitous throughout the universe, and we call them laws of physics. Life is not to be found throughout the universe. So far, this is the only place we detect life. It may be that there is some life in some other places, but at the very most, it's rare. And the other thing about life is that one of the laws of physics is that everything tends toward disorder. But living things create order. They create order. They're they create disorder sometimes. They're self-perpetuating. They are non-originating. Every single living thing comes from another living thing in an unbroken chain of living that's been going on for 4 billion years. There is nothing alive that's really new. It all comes from a living thing directly in a cell-to-cell handoff that's been going on 4 million years. And unlike some of the laws of physics, life is not to be found everywhere, and life creates order. So we have a word for something that breaks and disrupts the laws of physics, and that word is miracle. Life is a miracle, but we don't think of it that way. In the Western world, we treat the world as a de-spirited place that does not deserve reverence. And we've gotten the consequences. And those are all the problems that we see and the problems I've been talking about. So this is a peregrine falcon. It's one of my very favorite birds, maybe in the top 3. When I was in high school, you can see the date here, 1970. This article was in the New York Times Magazine. The peregrine falcon was considered unalterably doomed to extinction because of DDT and other hard pesticides. There was nothing anyone could do about it. That's what most people thought, but a very few people did not take that lying down. They were going to do what they could. So they went to the Arctic where there were a few left. They bred them in captivity, and then they reintroduced them after a few other people, actually at first 6 people in Suffolk County, Long Island, sued the county to stop the spraying of DDT. They won. They created a thing called the Environmental Defense Fund. This was really the start of the modern environmental movement. And then using law and the courts was a way that the environmental movement started to really gain momentum. It was because the eggshells of peregrine falcons and ospreys and bald eagles were breaking because of DDT. So they were doing that in the courts. Other people were breeding the birds and were putting them out for reintroduction, like him. Recognize anybody? That's me. It worked. When people won't take doom for an answer, it can work. Bald eagles on their way to extinction south of Alaska. Now we have bald eagles. We have so many bald eagle nests on Long Island that I don't really know how many there are right now. 5 years ago, there were a couple. Now, I don't know, there's maybe 12 or 15 or something. They were gone for 60 years. Now they are finally, decades later, they're finally repopulating. It's not really that unusual anymore to see a bald eagle. Ospreys, one of my favorite birds, one of my wife's very favorite birds. There were none when I was a kid. There were a few in the Chesapeake, maybe a few in Maine, but in the mid-Atlantic, it was like a giant eraser. And what I saw when I was 15 years old were nests with no birds, because the birds had all died out of old age after all their eggs broke because of DDT and the other pesticides. Well, I mentioned that a small handful of people sued Suffolk County, and then it went national, and now those birds are everywhere, everywhere. It's one of the greatest things about life around here, to see over the course of my lifetime things that were believed to be doomed, totally repopulating. Humpback whales on their way to extinction, so that decades before the actual whaling ban, which went into effect as recently as 1986, it's not in my lifetime, that's not that long ago. I already had my PhD in 1986. But humpback whales were given full protection legally in the 1940s because they were almost completely on the way out. And now it's almost unusual to go out in the ocean here and not see a humpback whale. In fact, we frequently see them when we are walking our dogs along the beach. Just yesterday, I needed to make a phone call as I was driving to our house near Montauk, and I decided to just go down to the shore to make the phone call and just watch for whales. And yeah, I saw 2 of them while I was on the phone. And for most of my life, that would have been inconceivable. But now you can literally take selfies with humpback whales. So caring and working can work. So I started the talk by saying we were going to answer the question about, do they really love us? But we're going to end by inverting the question and ask, can we really love them? Do we have the mental and emotional capacity to simply let life on Earth continue to exist? All right, we will answer the question, do they love us? There's the answer. Thank you so much for spending this evening with me. It's always great to be here, and it's like a little highlight of the summer. We took our boat across from Montauk today. It was just delightful to come here. No airports involved. Getting to see people in person for the first time in a very long time as far as giving talks. You know, most of the talks last year were all canceled. They all went online. And so it's really a delight. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. If you have any questions, I'm right here. Yes.
So does the hubris of humans have any parallels in the animal world?
Does the hubris of humans have any parallels in the animal world? Well, I said you can see a glimmer of something, of whatever it is, in some other species. Chimpanzees have a sort of a toxic masculinity, anyway. They create a lot of drama that is really unnecessary. And a chimpanzee will occasionally kill somebody he's known for 20 years. A human is capable of doing the same thing. So there are some parallels to that. Not quite, I think, the hubris, but I think that kind of toxic masculinity sort of edges toward the hubris. And when I say it's not at all necessary, we have two closest ape relatives, not just chimpanzees, but also bonobos. They're equally related to us, and they don't do it. They have female dominance, and in chimpanzees, males use dominance to suppress others, and they enforce it with violence. And in bonobos, females use dominance to suppress aggression, and they enforce it with grooming, playing, and sex. So I would rather be a bonobo. Yes.
A lot of what you talked about was through the lens of culture and evolution culture, which really fascinates me in a very different way of thinking about this. Two things that you didn't, I don't think you talked about, or two words you didn't use were instinct and pheromones. And I was a little bit surprised by that, because a lot of what we think we understand about animals is about instinct. Say something about.
Well, I was specifically talking about the things that are not instinct, although there is an instinct component. So culture is learned. It is not instinctual, but you have to have an instinctual capacity for learning your culture. So for instance, we have an instinctual capacity for learning a human style language, but we are not born knowing a language, nor will we learn a language unless we are taught a language. It's not instinctive to speak English or Hungarian or Vietnamese. It's cultural. We can do it because we have a mental template that is built in that allows us to learn it. But whether we learn one or the other is totally cultural. So there is an intersection between instinct and culture, what you're capable of learning. You know, we can sing, but we can't sing like a humpback whale. So the humpback whale's song is totally culturally learned, but they sing like that because they are instinctively capacitated to learn to sing like that. Hope that makes sense. Yes.
You gave a very excellent presentation about how we are helping human animals. This may be a stretch, but do you think animals might be able to help us in our days, our doomed days?
Would animals be able to help us in our doomed days? I don't see why they would be motivated to do so. They might like the idea of us all leaving Earth and colonizing Mars, the most psychotic idea in the history of human beings. But what in the world would be their motivation for helping us? That would be like us being motivated to help an infestation of rats that's gnawing our house to the, or termites or something like that, that's gnawing our house to the ground. So I don't think so. I think learning about other animals and how they live and how they are able to live successfully is incredibly instructive. I think, you know, I get a lot of my understanding about what solutions to our predicament could be from other animals and other cultures. That's usually where I draw a lot of my answers from. But yes. I don't think you can raise them in captivity and give them the cultural knowledge to survive in the wild. You can raise them in captivity and scaffold their time learning. And in a couple of cases, I know of one instance with elephants and one with macaws, where the reintroduction of orphaned young ones that are raised in captivity has been going on long enough that when they slowly release them and they continue to provide food and they eventually wander off and they form social groups, but they can come back if they need to. It's been going on long enough that they meet wild ones that have already figured it out and they can learn their culture from them. And that works. Now, not all animals are equally cultural, and some are hardly cultural at all. Like peregrine falcons, they chase things instinctively. So we raised those young ones out in the open where they could look around, they could get a sense of what was their territory, and we fed them. And then when they were old enough to fly, we opened the enclosure and they flew, but then they came right back for food. And within 2 or 3 days, they were chasing birds all over the place, but they weren't catching them. That would be an age when their parents would be feeding them, but we were feeding them. We were just leaving food. And they kept coming back until they started to be successful enough. And it is instinctive for them to disperse. So they leave after a while. We just, in our backyard, we had 3 young screech owls fledge out of a nest box. The parents feed them for a while. But then after they're about 5 weeks old or so, they start catching enough food and they're motivated to disperse. That's what they do. The other day we were out on the water and we watched some terns. We saw one young tern from this year, fledged a couple of weeks ago. It was calling and calling and calling. It landed on the water. It kept calling and an adult came and fed it. So that young one is learning how to fish, but the adult is scaffolding it to do that. Yes.
Do you have any examples of things that might not be directly related to certain behavior that helps survival? Like either like a first one group and something survive.
Yeah, there are a couple of examples from, I think both of these examples are from monkeys. And there's a form of playing that only like one group of monkeys somewhere in Central America only one group of monkeys does it, and the other groups of monkeys of the same species, they don't do it. And it's sort of a pointless thing. It's just a play thing. And it's a little weird. In one case, they play and they pull fur, and the others don't do that. So that would be a sort of just a quirky thing that caught on like a fad. Yes. That's why I put them there.
Yeah, that's good. But given the scope of the challenge, what advice would you give, say, a budding scientist? Where to begin?
Yeah. Okay. Actually, there was another encouraging thing that I wanted to have a little demonstration of, and we didn't get to do that. But I'll tell you what it was. We came over from Montauk today, and we basically filled the cockpit of my boat with balloons. And they're outlawed here. Same balloons are outlawed here. So, people can accomplish things when they want to. And as far as advice for budding people, it's really important to just love the living world first. I would say, am I talking to you? I guess I'm talking to you. So, like, half the time, forget about the problems and just enjoy all the things that you can enjoy. And then do little things you can do. When I was 12 years old, there was a fish hatchery that used to raise fish and put them out in ponds where I used to go fishing. I thought that was a great thing. Now I think it's silly, but I thought it was a great thing. And they were going to close the fish hatchery. So I read in the newspaper, they're going to close the fish hatchery. To keep it open, write a letter to the such and such assemblyman in the New York State Assembly. So I wrote a letter when I was 12 years old. And the hatchery is still open. And I'm a professional writer. So it just goes to show you how good that letter was. So just do the little things that you can do. And then as you see things you can get involved in, like, if there's anything you can do here on a volunteer basis, just get involved with people. Clean tanks. When you get older, you can do some educational stuff where you're the teacher, believe it or not. Education helps a lot. Try to get as much and as good an education as you can get working in, going into programs that match the things that you're interested in. I didn't really know anything about what I was doing. I totally blundered my way all along the way. I had no guidance. I had no mentoring. I had no nothing. I just blundered and bumped along, and mostly existed in a state of total existential dread for about 15 years. And then it seems to have kind of worked out. I'm a little traumatized, but it kind of worked out. So, yes. Maybe that's why they have big brains. Well, that's an excellent question, but I don't know what a bat brain looks like. I don't know if a bat brain compared to a mouse brain might look, maybe at the same size, might look very, very intricate compared to a similar size mouse brain. I don't actually know. You could look that up easily, but that is an excellent question. There are different ways of getting small brains, especially because flight requires lightness. And most birds are small and very, very light, and bats are mostly small, and they need to be very light to fly. But there are ways to pack a lot of neurons into small brains. Bird neurons are much smaller than ours. They pack a lot into a much smaller space, and birds are incredibly alert. A lot of birds learn really quickly. It doesn't scale exactly with the size of your brain. Learning ability, and this is not totally logical. It doesn't make complete sense, but learning ability tends to scale with how much your brain weighs compared to how much your body weighs. So if you have a relatively large brain, those species tend to be what we call smart, They learn quickly. They're very versatile, but they might be small. Like a parrot is very, very intelligent and very smart and learns amazingly, but they have a really small brain. But the percent of their body weight, that is their brain, is bigger than most birds. So it's a weird scaling. It's not an absolute size kind of a thing. Yes, in the back. Well, first of all, we do have a lot of neurons in the brain. We have, I believe it's true that we have more neurons in the conscious thinking part of the brain than any other animal is known to have. And that includes some animals with bigger brains than we have. So we have a lot of processing power. And that might have been facilitated. You know, I don't think that necessarily came first. It might have been that we did some things a little different, and that and having a bigger brain with more processing made that work better. So a lot of animals have a few words for things, and some of them have specific alarms for specific things, or they have specific nouns for specific things, but their vocabulary is pretty small or very small. And we have an intricate type of language. That is very different. The only other animals that might have something like that is dolphins, but it's things dolphins do seem to require that they are having an intricate conversation, but nobody has heard or decoded the syntax and the patterns of that conversation. So that's a maybe. That's the only maybe I know about really being able to discuss something. But I think the ability that humans have to discuss something is a difference, and getting a little bit more like that may have put pressure on survival pressure for having a bigger brain that could have more language capacity. I mean, it may have gone like that. I think that's the fundamental thing that is different, and it's a matter of scale. Like there are a lot of animals that can say, watch out, there's a snake here. We were bird watching once in Trinidad, and our bird guide said, oh, I hear a mot-mot saying there's a boa in the tree. So we walked like a quarter mile, and there's a mot-mot, and there's a boa, and there were like 20 other birds. They all understood what the alarm was about, and they were all there, you know, scolding the boa and basically blowing its cover and saying, you know, we all see you. So, but I don't know of any other animal that can say, be careful when you go there. I saw a snake there yesterday. I don't know of any other animals that can have that kind of conversation. So to me, it's the language capacity that I think is the most differentiated thing between us and the other animals that currently exist. But I say currently because there are probably 25 species or so that are, you know, on that stem leading to us that don't exist anymore, including a few others that were human, that were they're placed in the genus Homo, but they were like Neanderthals. They're considered to be a different species, so closely related that we could interbreed with them. It's complicated, but to see only us now and only other animals now and forget all of that bridging and all of those stages is to miss the likely scenario.
So I would like to interrupt and say thank you so much. And
Books in the back.
yep, in the back of the room are some of Dr. Safina's books, and I believe he has something to sign it with. So if you, for some strange reason, don't have all his books, stop back and buy a couple on the way out. And thank you so much.
Thank you again.